after the Pioneers launched and were very successful, in the very beginning of the 1970s, and were able to fly by and work just fine, NASA realized that sure enough, the Grand Tour idea was going to work. Again, Mariner 11, Mariner 12, which they renamed Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, were launched, and they were launched on actually quite a large rocket. So what we have here is that we have a Titan missile, and on the side of it are two pretty sizable rockets strapped to the side, and a Centaur rocket sitting on top of it. And so the trio on the bottom launched this thing up, and then the Centaur launched it to push it on. The Voyagers were much, much heavier spacecraft than the Pioneers. They had far more equipment on board. They had a much, much, much more robust RTG to provide electrical power. Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 were launched. Now, ironically, Voyager 2 was launched first, and Voyager 1 was launched a few weeks later. Now, the reason for this is that Voyager, that they took slightly different paths. One had a little bit farther to go than the other because of when they were launched. And ironically, Voyager 1 arrived at Jupiter first, and Voyager 2 a little bit later, even though Voyager 2 launched first. Its orbit actually took it a little bit longer to get there. NASA also did a plaque type thing on it, similar to what they did on the Pioneers from the previous lecture, except that they learned their lesson here about the public relations sort of thing, and instead they put a LP on board. And now LP, this is like a vinyl record, except it was metal and had recorded on board a greeting and then children saying hello in languages, many different languages that were spoken on Earth, had greetings from various world leaders, had sounds of Earth. So it had the sound of the wind blowing, and brooks and rivers and streams and birds and various animals and some music, the kind of music that we listen to and so forth. So all that was on this record, so that, I suppose any aliens that find it could put it on a turntable and listen to it. Well, not knowing if people knew what to do, they actually stuck a little plaque over it that had on the plaque a picture of a turntable with a stylus on it, giving instructions here. The idea that it spins at a certain rate. They tried to get the spin rate down that it's supposed to be turning at. You can't say 33 and a third RPM because they wouldn't know how to read that, or what a minute would be, which is a human designation. So they're trying to put it in terms of physical constants as to how many times it's supposed to turn, and then they had a similar sort of thing to the Wayfinder from the Pioneers in terms of distances to various sort of things, and so. And then attempts at explaining what does DNA look like and so forth. Now, whether any aliens would actually figure this out, I have no clue. But again, the chance of it ever being found is next to nothing. So really, this is more for our benefit to say that, hey, we've put something out there that will outlive us. That's kind of more for our benefit, for public relations benefit, rather than the likelihood of anyone actually finding it. So Voyager 1 was launched and flew from Earth to Jupiter. Jupiter tossed it to Saturn. And as I said in an earlier lecture, we sacrificed Voyager 1 because we let it sling in such a path that we got to study the rings of Saturn very closely. And Voyager 2 was tossed from Saturn to Uranus and from Uranus to Neptune. And so Voyager 1 studied the rings of Saturn. Voyager 2 studied Uranus and Neptune. Both of them studied Saturn and Jupiter. Those are the two biggest things that are out there, and the things that we thought we needed to study the most. Afterwards, we realized that Uranus and Neptune are really far more interesting than we originally had thought that they would be. And so we now kind of, some people were wondering if maybe they should have both gone, if we should have sacrificed the study of the rings in order to study Uranus and Neptune more. But that the decision, you don't really know until after you do it what's going to be the best thing to do. Okay, so here they are, some timelines as to when they were launched. And again, they were launched in 1977. They made it to Jupiter pretty quick, 1979, so just a couple years. Got to Saturn in 1980 and 1981, so just a year or two more. But it took a long time because the outer solar system is really spread out. It took until 1986 to arrive at Uranus. I'd already started graduate school by that point. And so remember teaching astronomy labs when we were getting the first things back from Uranus. And then it flew on to Neptune in 1989, and this was, I think, one of the early semesters that I was teaching astronomy, teaching the lecture, and it was like, as this thing was flying by, we're getting real time some of the information back from Neptune, which we were seeing for the very first time, and so, but I think you had to launch something in 1977, and it has to still be running 11 years later in August of 1989. And again, they had never expected any spacecraft to last for that long. But this is what had to be done for the Voyagers. That was not the last spacecraft that was launched to the outer solar system. We've already talked about New Horizons. New Horizons was launched and flew by Pluto and then out to visit the other Kuiper Belt object. So, spacecraft leaving the solar system. In 2016, I got this graphic right here from a place called heavensabove.com. It's really a wonderful website that tells you all about satellites. If you want to go out and look at satellites, there's a lot of satellites you can see with the naked eye, but it also has this thing that tells you where the spacecraft are that are leaving the solar system. And so that's where they were in November of 2016. That's where they were in April of 2018. That's where they were in October of 2000. In November of 2019, you see that the spacecraft are getting further apart. Notice, though, that Voyager 1 is getting right near the edge. One of the Pioneers are getting right near the edge. Pioneer 10 is getting right near the edge of the screen. And so they're about to go off the screen right there. So in 2020, they changed the scale of the drawing. That's why it looks like they jumped backwards here from the previous one. So in November of 2020, they made the drawing a bigger scale, so you can see these things further out there. And then finally now we have in April of 2021. And so the spacecraft are continuing to get out further and further. Currently, as of when I'm recording this, the Voyager 1 spacecraft is still the one that's going the fastest and is the farthest out. It went slinging past Jupiter, slinging past Saturn. There was no attempt to try to make it go past anything else. It just like threw it out of the solar system at very high velocity. So it's the farthest one out at over 150 astronomical units. Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11, they no longer work. So they are still moving out the solar system, but they no longer are operational. So those right here, they're leaving the solar system. They quit working. The Voyagers are still working, but they are just barely working. The radiothermal generators that provide power for them is not really working as well as it used to, because it's so far. I mean, it has been so long that it's been out there that it's simply not generating the electricity that it was. New Horizons, about 50 AU out. We talked about the New Horizons spacecraft on the way to Pluto earlier in the semester. Now, technically, it's 49.99 something AU right now as of the 18th. It'll be 50 actually in just a 50 AU really in a number of days from now, a week or so, and so it's coming up on that 50, but it rounds to 50 AU. Kevin, since rounding to the 10th spot, it would round to 50 AU, and so that's kind of where things are with that right now. But these are the ones that are currently leaving the solar system. Only 5 spacecraft, only 5 things. Of course, they're all unmanned. Only 5 things built by humans are leaving the solar system. Well, those 5, Voyager 1, Voyager 2, Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11, and New Horizons, have all visited the outer solar system. Others have been out there too. Ulysses went past Jupiter into an orbit and allowed it to study the sun from the north and south poles. Galileo was a spacecraft actually sent to Jupiter, as was more recently the Juno spacecraft, which was launched toward Jupiter. And the Cassini spacecraft was sent to Saturn. Well, we couldn't get it directly to Saturn, so we sent it to Jupiter and let Jupiter toss it to Saturn. And here is a recent graphic, actually, that NASA's put out, marking the milestone of New Horizons reaching the 50 AU mark, or about to reach the 50 AU mark. And this shows the relative positions of the different spacecraft that are out there, the different things they've flown past, and so forth. And you can see Pioneer going off in one direction, the Voyagers going off different directions there as well. So there we have kind of the schematic. Now the next thing is, what have they found out there? Now we'll get to that sort of towards the end of the class. We'll talk about what they're really finding at the edge of the solar system, because they are now reaching interstellar space. So except for New Horizons. New Horizons is still going through the Kuiper Belt. But the others are starting to reach the edge of interstellar space. Now, Pioneer 10 and 11 no longer function. Their RTGs did not have as much plutonium in them as the Voyagers did, and so they did not last as long. They have ceased functioning a long time ago. The Voyagers are barely producing any electricity to operate any instruments, but they are noticing that there's a change in the kind of material they're passing through. Remember, space is not totally empty. There's interstellar medium, interplanetary medium, there's dust and gas, just a few things out there, but they are noticing a very slight change as they're transitioning from the solar system into interstellar space. And so this is kind of where things are right now. The 5 that are leaving the solar system. 3 of them are working. Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 barely, and the New Horizons, which is working just fine. 2 of them are dead, but they're still just coasting out of the solar system, Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11.